In the heart of ancient Jerusalem, where golden rooftops gleamed under the desert sun and merchants whispered of fortunes gained and lost, there lived a man whose name was feared and revered, Eliab the merchant. He was a man who had everything: vast storehouses overflowing with grain, robes woven with threads of silver, feasts that lasted till dawn. He had built an empire of wealth, outwitting kings, priests, and fate itself. Or so he thought. Because on one fateful night, as he lay in his palace, dreaming of the many years of pleasure ahead, a voice thundered from the heavens, "You fool! This very night your soul will be required of you." By sunrise, Eliab was gone. His gold meant nothing. His storehouses stood useless. His name was forgotten. This is his story, the story of a man who gained everything but lost his soul. And perhaps without realizing it, it is our story too. The sun had barely risen over the hills of Judea when young Eliab set out with his father, Matan, to the family's small vineyard. The air was thick with the scent of ripening grapes, and the faint bleating of sheep could be heard in the distance. Eliab, no more than 10 years old at the time, dragged his feet behind his father, his small hands calloused from the early morning labor. Matan, a strong yet humble man, plucked a grape from the vine, examined it, and nodded in satisfaction. "The land has been kind to us this year," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. Eliab, however, was less impressed. He wiped the sweat from his brow and muttered, "Why must we work so hard, father? Why can we not buy grapes from the market like the rich men in the city?" Matan chuckled, kneeling to look his son in the eye. "Because, my son, wealth is not in gold or silver, but in the blessings of the earth. A man who tills the land is never in want." Eliab, still young and impatient, did not understand. As he helped carry the baskets of grapes toward their small house, his mind wandered to the traders who often passed through their village. He had seen their caravans, their fine robes, and the gold rings that gleamed on their fingers. That was the life he wanted, not one of sweat and soil, but one of luxury and power. Years passed, and Eliab grew into a sharp young man. Though he worked diligently alongside his father, his heart was not in the fields. His mind was in the bustling cities, Jerusalem, Jericho, even far-off Alexandria. One evening, as he and his father sat by the fire, Matan spoke of the faithfulness of God. "The Lord provides, my son," he said, breaking a piece of bread. "What we have is enough. We do not chase riches, for we know that he sustains us." Eliab, now 17, could not contain his thoughts any longer. "But why should we settle for just enough? Father, I see traders passing through our village, men with wealth beyond measure. They do not toil in the fields like us, yet they own vineyards 10 times the size of ours." Matan sighed. "And yet, my son, do they sleep peacefully at night? What good is gold if a man's soul is empty?" Eliab frowned but said nothing. That night, as he lay on his straw bed, he made a decision: he would leave. He would not be a farmer like his father. He would be a man of trade, of business, of power. And so, at dawn, he packed a small satchel, took the few coins he had saved, and set off for the city. Jerusalem was unlike anything Eliab had ever seen. The city's streets were alive with the sounds of merchants haggling, camels groaning under the weight of their burdens, and the distant hum of temple prayers. With little more than determination, Eliab found work as an apprentice to a spice trader named Hiram. The old man was shrewd but fair, and he quickly recognized Eliab's sharp mind. "You have the instincts of a trader, boy," Hiram said one afternoon, watching as Eliab skillfully bargained down a supplier. "With time, you may become richer than even the merchants at the city gates." Eliab took those words to heart. He worked tirelessly, learning the trade, how to buy low, sell high, and manipulate the market to his advantage. By the time he was 30, he had surpassed even his master. He had acquired storehouses of grain, fields of barley, vineyards, and trade routes stretching from Judea to Egypt. He had built a merchant empire, and his name was spoken with both admiration and fear. But with his wealth came arrogance. Eliab no longer remembered his father's teachings. He no longer thought of the small vineyard or the simple meals they shared. Now he dined on meats and drank from goblets of gold. His robes were embroidered with threads of silver, and his estate stood like a palace. But something else had changed. His heart had hardened. One evening, a poor man approached him outside the marketplace. "Master Eliab," the beggar pleaded, "I have 3 children and we have not eaten in days. Might you spare even a handful of grain?" Eliab sneered. "Am I the keeper of every hungry mouth in Judea? Go work for your bread as I did." The beggar's eyes filled with sorrow. "The Lord sees the heart of man," he whispered before turning away. But Eliab only laughed. That night, as he sat in his grand estate, watching the torches flicker against the marble walls, a thought struck him. He was untouchable. He had built his fortune with his own hands, and no one, not man nor God, could take it from him, but he did not know that his days were numbered. Eliab's name had become synonymous with wealth. In Jerusalem, his estate stood taller than any merchant's house, a symbol of his success. The gates were carved from cedar wood imported from Lebanon, his floors polished with fine marble, and his gardens bloomed with exotic flowers from distant lands. Yet, despite his riches, Eliab was a man of stone. He surrounded himself with merchants, landowners, and tax collectors, men who spoke only of profit and power. They praised him to his face, calling him the wisest trader in all of Judea, but behind closed doors they whispered, "Eliab is rich in coin but poor in spirit. He gives nothing, and one day his hands will be empty." But Eliab did not care for the opinions of lesser men. He had built his empire with his own hands, and he owed no one anything. One evening, a group of starving laborers came to his estate. The year had been hard, a drought had dried up the wells, and many had lost their crops. A frail woman stepped forward. Her hands trembled as she held a small child in her arms. "Master Eliab," she said, her voice weak, "we have heard that your storehouses are full beyond measure. Please have mercy. My husband died in the fields, and my children have not eaten for days. Might you spare just a little grain?" Eliab folded his arms, his golden rings gleaming in the torchlight. He studied the woman for a moment, then sighed as if her request was a great burden. "Tell me," he said, his voice cool, "did I cause the drought?" The woman hesitated. "No, master. Did I tell your husband to DD?" She lowered her head. "No, master." Eliab smirked. "Then why should I be responsible for feeding you? Go and work for your bread, as I did." A hush fell over the crowd. The woman clutched her child tightly. "Master, the Lord sees the heart of man." Eliab laughed and shut the gates. A few days later, an elderly rabbi visited Eliab. He was known for his wisdom, and many sought his counsel. Eliab, however, had no patience for old men with riddles. "Master Eliab," the rabbi said as he sat across from him in the grand hall, "I have heard of your great wealth. Indeed, your barns are full, and your vineyards flourish. But tell me, do you not fear the Lord?" Eliab scoffed. "Rabbi, I have made my own fortune. What have I to fear?" The old man nodded slowly. "Let me tell you a story," he said. Eliab rolled his eyes, but motioned for the rabbi to continue. "A man once built great storehouses, filling them with grain beyond measure. He said to himself, 'Now I have all I need for many years. I will relax, eat, drink, and be merry.'" Eliab smirked. "That sounds like a wise man." The rabbi shook his head. "But that very night the Lord said to him, 'You fool, this very night your soul is required of you. Then who will own what you have stored up?'" Eliab's smirk faded. The rabbi leaned closer. "So it is with the one who stores up treasure for himself but is not rich toward God." For a moment, Eliab felt something stir in his chest, a strange unease. But then he pushed the feeling away. He laughed, waving a dismissive hand. "Rabbi, wisdom is good for the poor, but wealth is better for the wise." The rabbi sighed. "Then may the Lord open your eyes before it is too late." He stood and left Eliab alone in his grand hall, the flickering torchlight casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. That summer, Eliab's harvest was the greatest he had ever seen. The fields of wheat stretched like golden waves, the fig trees bent under the weight of their fruit, and the grapevines swelled with abundance. His storehouses were already full, yet the grain kept coming. Eliab walked through his fields smiling. His servants bowed as he passed, and merchants looked on with envy. "This is it," he murmured to himself. "I have everything I have ever wanted." But then he frowned. His barns were already bursting with grain. There was no more space. So he called his servants, builders, and architects to his grand hall and declared, I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones. Then I will say to myself, you have plenty stored up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry. The city marveled at his ambition, but the poor sighed in despair. That evening, one of Eliab's most loyal servants, Ezra, approached him cautiously. Master, he said, bowing low, forgive me for speaking out of turn, but have you considered sharing some of this grain with those in need? Eliab raised an eyebrow. And why would I do that? Ezra swallowed hard. Master, life is uncertain. Should you not prepare your soul as well? Eliab laughed bitterly. Ezra, foolish boy, my barns are not big enough for my wealth, and you expect me to think about my soul? Ezra lowered his gaze. Master, even King Solomon in all his wisdom knew that wealth is fleeting. Eliab snapped. Enough! Go see that my new barns are built at once. Ezra bowed and left, his heart heavy. And that night a storm gathered in the heavens. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of crimson and gold. In Eliab's vast courtyard, the scent of roasted meat and spiced wine filled the air. Tonight was a night of celebration, the night he would proclaim his triumph over fortune, life, and destiny itself. The courtyard was filled with Jerusalem's most powerful merchants, landowners, and tax collectors. Music echoed through the grand estate as dancers swayed to the rhythm of drums. Servants rushed back and forth, carrying golden platters stacked with figs, roasted lamb, and bread. Eliab sat at the head of the table, his robe embroidered with gold, his rings glimmering in the candlelight. He raised his goblet, his voice booming over the festivities. My friends, tonight we celebrate success. My storehouses are filled beyond measure. My wealth is greater than ever before. And now I shall build even greater barns, so I will never have to work again. The guests cheered, lifting their goblets in a toast. Eliab smirked, drinking deeply. He turned to his closest friend, a fellow merchant, and chuckled. Tell me, Ben-Hur, have I not mastered life itself? I have outwitted fortune, and now I will live in ease for many years to come. Ben-Hur, an older man with streaks of gray in his beard, smiled weakly. You have done well, Eliab. But tell me, have you prepared for what comes after this life? Eliab laughed heartily, slapping the man on the back. Ah, Ben-Hur, always speaking like the old rabbis. But listen to me, my friend. Life is meant for pleasure, for indulgence, for joy. What comes after? Who knows? But I am certain of this, I shall eat, drink, and be merry for many years to come. The guests cheered again, and the music grew louder. But beyond the estate, a cold wind began to stir in the night. That night, Eliab retired to his lavish chamber, his mind swimming with the pleasures of the feast. He lay upon his bed of fine silk, stretching out with a satisfied sigh. But sleep did not come easily. A strange chill crept into the room, and though the torches burned bright, the shadows seemed to lengthen unnaturally. And then, as his eyelids grew heavy, he dreamed. In his dream, he stood alone in an endless desert, the sky black and swirling with storm clouds. A deep rumbling filled the air, and suddenly, a great voice like thunder spoke his name, Eliab. The ground trembled beneath him. A bright light erupted from the sky, and before him stood a figure cloaked in fire and glory. Though Eliab could not see its face, he felt its presence pierce into his very soul. Who are you? Eliab stammered, shielding his eyes. You fool! The voice roared, shaking the heavens. Tonight, this very night, your soul will be required of you. Now tell me, who will own what you have stored up? Eliab staggered back, his heart pounding. No, I have worked for this. I have earned my wealth. I have. But the light grew blinding, and the ground crumbled beneath his feet. He fell into darkness, screaming. Eliab awoke with a start. His heart pounded violently in his chest. His silk robe was drenched in sweat. The dream had felt too real. His mouth was dry. He reached for his goblet of wine, but his hand trembled violently. His fingers went numb, and a sharp pain gripped his chest. He gasped. A strange coldness spread through his body. His vision blurred. His breaths came in ragged gasps. Eliab clutched his chest, his mouth opening to cry for help, but no sound came out. And then, silence. As dawn broke, his servants found him lifeless in his bed. His wealth, his storehouses, his golden goblets, none of it mattered anymore. the man who had once laughed at the words of wisdom, the man who had denied the poor, the man who had said to himself, "I will eat, drink, and be merry for many years," had no more years left. The news of Eliab's sudden death spread like wildfire through the city. Some were shocked. Others whispered in hushed voices. The poor widow, who had begged him for grain, shook her head. "The Lord saw his heart," she murmured. "His servants mourned, but not for long. With their master gone, his estate was divided among strangers. The grand barns he had planned, never built. The grain he had hoarded, left to rot. The gold he had cherished, passed from hand to hand, spent by men he had never met. And as the days passed, Eliab's name was slowly forgotten." In the city, an old rabbi stood in the marketplace, recounting Eliab's story to those who gathered. With a sigh, he spoke. "So it is with the one who stores up treasure for himself but is not rich toward God." A young merchant hearing this asked, "Rabbi, what should we do then? Should we not seek to provide for ourselves?" The rabbi nodded. "It is not wrong to labor nor to gain wealth, but what good is it if your soul is empty?" The merchant pondered this. "And what must a man do to be rich toward God?" The rabbi smiled. "Give to those in need, love your neighbor, seek justice, live humbly. For in the end, a man's soul is worth more than all the gold in the world." And so, the parable of the rich fool lived on, a warning to all who place their trust in wealth over wisdom. Eliab's story is more than just a tale of greed. It's a warning, a reflection, and a choice. We spend our lives chasing wealth, success, and comfort, believing we have time. But in the end, no man knows the day or the hour when his soul will be required of him. So, I ask you, are you storing up treasures that will last or ones that will fade? Are you building a future that ends in dust or one that echoes in eternity? Eliab thought he had many years to enjoy his riches, but his time ran out in a single night. Don't let the same happen to you. If you found this story meaningful, if it made you reflect on life and purpose, subscribe to this channel for more powerful stories, lessons, and wisdom that challenge the way we see the world. Let's not just chase riches that fade, let's seek wisdom that lasts forever. Subscribe now, because every story has a lesson, and every lesson is a chance to change.